I'm Lynn Cook. Like she said, I am an adult ADHD coach. I've been involved in the startup community for a number of years. I actually won a grant through the SEIC competition in 2016 for a startup that is no longer in business, but it was time to let it go. Yeah, in the way that sometimes we let things go. So I've been an adult ADHD coach for about 2 years and work primarily with creatives and entrepreneurs, a lot of premenopausal women on all sorts of fascinating things. I've got a lot of engineers right now, but my clientele has run the gamut from high-end strippers to youth ministers. So I work with a little bit of everybody. Now, this is my panel, and I am going to allow them to introduce themselves because honestly, there are some of them that I hadn't met until today. So, Martha, you want to go first?
Great, yeah. I'm Martha Valenta. I've been at a couple of startups in recent years. One is AliveCore. They're in California. They're a health tech startup, an Internet of Things. They have an Internet of Things device as well, an FDA-approved device for catching heart arrhythmias and other things. Really, really cool stuff. And I also worked at Freight Science for a little while. And I have my own business, which is I Need That Art. It's a gallery in Clayton, on Clayton Road, and I'm an artist there as well. So IT, art, all the things, ADD.
Hi there. My name is Thomas Wall. I am the owner and principal of Mitchell Wall Architecture and Design. We are a high-end custom residential company. We design big homes for rich people, and I get to, live cathartically through that process. Diagnosed with ADHD when I was in graduate school, but if you look back through a grade report for any grade, you could pick one at random, they would all say the same thing. Tom is very intelligent. Tom would do great if he could just sit still. So I've managed to take that and make it a strength. But before we get too far into that, I'll pass it along.
So I'm Paul Hyrant. I'm what my wife calls a serial entrepreneur. I don't like the Airbnb guys. I don't sell Captain Crunch, but that's what they did as serial entrepreneurs. Anyway, entrepreneur joke, sorry. So I started it out in the music business, and my dad thought it wasn't right that I worked for about 5 days, and then I played on my sailboat for 5 days, and then I worked for 5 days. So he said, come learn how to sell. You'll always be able to sell something. And he sold medical books. That led to a 30-year career in medical publishing. I started coding to solve my own problems in 1980, and that led to my breaking the publishing industry by moving texts online, CD-ROM first and then online. Was a part of 3 different medical information startups that were acquired by WebMD, a part of 2 cybersecurity startups, more recently a cybersecurity startup out of San Jose that got acquired. And now I had started a block ID, company called Block ID, which was applying AI in the blockchain to personal identity. But in 2018, I spoke at a bunch of conferences, talked to 100 VCs, and realized the customers, the market, and the financiers don't have a clue what I was talking about. And they still don't, so I'm still not doing anything with it. But I now work, my son and I have had a media company for about 20 years now. And so I work with the Focal Point, which is a nonprofit folk and roots music venue, do all the video production. We do 5-camera video productions of the full concerts. Focal Point St. Louis on YouTube. Like and subscribe, please. Yeah, it's a great venue, supports all kinds of artists. And if you can, come out Saturday night, because a St. Louis kid who won the teen talent contest years ago, his name is Royce Martin. Yeah, she knows. He is an amazing artist. He learned to play piano on his sister's little $20 synthesizer keyboard. And when he was at Pianos for People, because that's the only place he could play a real piano, they heard him and said, we got to get this kid a piano and a teacher. And he graduated from Berklee School of Music. He's now composing for Hollywood. He's done 2 films. He did all the music for the new Fresh Prince of Bel-Air and now he's working on a new movie. So this may be the last time we're able to get him to perform in St. Louis. He's an amazing kid, a wonderful artist, and a beautiful person.
I'm talking about you.
He also has ADHD.
Hi, I'm Julie Lawson, and I am the CEO of Rains Institute, which is my company. It's the, I think, 5th company I've started, so kind of a serial entrepreneur also. Usually in the nonprofit or community space, but some dabbling outside of that. And what I do now is leadership development and association management. So the professional development organizations that you might be in, my team runs that, and then layered on top of that, a lot of leadership development and executive coaching.
Excellent. Well, because so many of you do seem to be serial entrepreneurs, with the exception of Tom, who has found other ways to make his ADHD work for him.
To be clear, I had 16 jobs in 4 years.
Fair enough. So some of you have had corporate positions. What made you make the leap from a corporate position to working on your own?
Boredom. I was in a cubicle for years. I don't know how many years, maybe 15, in fintech, because that's a good place to put an artist. I got into UX. I started as a graphic designer. I was supposed to be a fine artist from the get-go, but my parents kind of squashed it. And I got a computer when, this is not a cool thing anymore because all the kids get computers when they're really little, but I'm 50 years old and I got a computer when I was 8 years old, and my parents wouldn't buy any software. So I wasn't scared of coding and the computers and stuff. And so I went into graphic design because that was the only thing my parents were kind of on board with. And because they had squashed my fine art degree dreams, I had run off and gotten married. None of this makes sense except if you're ADD. So by the time I finished my graphic design degree, I was married with a child, and I realized that he wasn't going to be, let's just say, financially supportive, emotionally supportive, or anything enough for what we were in at that point. And so I was just trying to figure out, like, how do I monetize whatever I know enough? And when we inevitably got divorced, I got into UX. And again, I was just trying to monetize whatever skills I had so that I could take care of the kids. And met somebody who told me that I was a BA and a UXer, and I didn't know what really any of these things were. Really, at that time, I was calling myself a web designer. And they were right, though, because I was asking all the same questions as those roles would ask. Like, what are the goals? Who's the user? What are they trying to do? I was leading with empathy, which I think is something that a lot of UXers tend to do. And so I ended up at literally every fintech company in St. Louis, doing really well in UX. I was at MasterCard, where I worked on a massive project for them. It was my first real thing. And I was at City Mortgage. I was at Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis. I've done work for Edward Jones, literally any place, IT, fintech. But I hated being, Wells Fargo Advisors, I don't know if I mentioned that one, but I hated being in a cubicle. I hated being forced to be in a cubicle from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. When I had finished my work already. And I had a lot of people say, slow down, you're making the rest of us look bad. But what do you do? Like, you're just, what else are you gonna do? I read a lot of audiobooks and other things in my cubicle, but I didn't feel like that was right. And so I eventually went into consulting, and then I jumped into the startup world. Startups weren't as much of an option earlier on because they didn't pay. You know, there was no stability in money, and I had to take care of the kids, yeah. So that was my journey from corporate to elsewhere.
So I never have worked in the corporate realm as these people are going to be discussing it. But where I learned that I was going to be no good in the corporate world was when I was living in Los Angeles just after college. I have my undergraduate degree in medieval literature, which is so useful, so marketable. I mean, the jobs were just coming in, but no, I wanted to go wait tables in LA. And thank you. And when I graduated, I had a degree in medieval literature with a concentration in architecture, and my mother said, "Great, you can design castles." So I went out to Los Angeles, where I was going to make it big as an actor, model, or whatever, just party and hang out for a while, which is what wound up happening. But I was working in restaurants, like everybody does in LA, just to make ends meet. And I learned very quickly that I did not do well in corporate restaurants, in chain restaurants, where here is the guidebook of how you're supposed to do every element of your job. I can't do that. I can't sit down and do a checklist of chores. All you need to do is ask my wife about that. Drives her nuts. She asked me to take out the garbage. 3 hours later, I'm vacuuming the basement and the garbage is still upstairs, but it's made its way halfway to the door. So at least there's that. But I was going to come back to it.
Of course.
Yeah. So I learned very early on in my non-career that I wasn't going to be suited for the corporate world. Every time I worked for internships in architecture school, every time I've worked professionally, it has been for small firms. Ultimately, when I came back to St. Louis, took over the family firm after my dad passed away, I have been able to sit in a role where I can do my work my way, which ultimately, when you have ADHD, is a requirement. You can't do it someone else's way. You have to do it your way. And that's the only way you can succeed. But the beautiful part is that when you do get to do it your way, you can do some pretty incredible things.
You can go first.
Yeah, I'm over here nodding because one of the things that when I first realized I probably need to go get a diagnosis was watching myself clean my house. You were saying, like, you take the trash halfway to the door, but that gets boring. Why take it all the way out? So you're going to turn around and do something else. And I can't finish the dishes to save my life. If I start the bathroom, I have to stop in the middle and go do the dishes a little bit and then come back and finish the bath. It never one chore at one time. It's just, yeah. And that was true of the workplace as well. So that corporate environment of 9 to 5 does not work unless there's just two things that have to happen for that to work for us. One is you have to be interested in what you're doing all those hours. And two, you have to fill every minute from 9 to 5. If you're that busy, you're fine. If you're not, it doesn't work. It's too boring too quickly. So that was, I think, part of the issue. I was an executive director for a while, so that, I think, fed that need to be able to make my own boundaries and set my own rules and my own timeline and whatnot. So that was very helpful. But as soon as you try to box in, it doesn't work. We work at our own pace. I was often finishing for other people and moving really quickly and more quickly than other people wanted to, and into things that other people said, where are you going? What? So it just worked better to be on my own and be able to do what needs to be done on the timeline that works for me.
So I'm going to tell a little story that's an allegory from my corporate career. So how many of you have heard of the Indian parable of the blind man and the elephant? Okay, a few are going to learn something new. So there was this elephant standing there, and these blind men walked up to the elephant. One of them grabbed his trunk and said, "Oh, this is a giant snake." Another one grabbed his leg and said, "No, this is a tree." Another one felt his side and said, "No, this is a wall." The other one grabbed his tail and said, "No, it's a rope that's wiggling." However, that story's never told with the ADHD person who was there because they don't like the ending. He touched every piece of that elephant and walked around to the back and stepped in something, and he said, "You're all full of crap." That was my life in corporate. I luckily was successful enough to be allowed to do all kinds of crazy things. So started putting books in electronic form against the editor's wishes. And got in trouble for it, and then got rewarded for it, and got given a division. Found a company to acquire, which was not my job. The acquisition went successfully, so suddenly that was my job. But every time I turned around, people would say to me, "Don't you understand the saying? Don't ask for permission, but you got to ask for forgiveness." And my line was, Why would I ask for forgiveness? I'm the only one doing anything, which they didn't like. So that's when I decided I really need to get out of here. So I left, started a company, and we were one of the first startups downtown called Visual Press. And I know we were the first because nobody was downtown. You couldn't even go any place for lunch downtown. This was in 1985. So went back into the corporate world for a little bit because that startup got acquired, and then left again, and that was in 98, and kind of never looked back after that. But it's always the issue of those of us with ADHD. The hyperfocus can be a superpower or it can be debilitating. And so I think the key is, how do you manage that? How do you get a mindful approach to using that ability to hyperfocus to produce something and follow through long enough to see that production to the end? And part of that is developing skills, but also part of that is working in a team. Yes, working with other people, which is not easy for us.
Well, you know, you hit on something you didn't directly say, but I think that we tend to make connections that other people don't make, like odd connections. And if you're working for someone and they disagree with the connection that you've made, and you can't work so far as to ask forgiveness, you end up just hitting the wall. I hit the wall like many, many times. Had I not hit a wall, Rocket Mortgage would have been a Citibank product, you know, because I was like, we should be able to apply for a mortgage on your phone with every little pocket of time that you have. And they were like, no, nobody would do that. Why would anybody do that? I'm like, well, let's just see here. But there's things like that I think that we make these connections, and if we're a cog in a big machine, and our leadership isn't interested in that idea at all, in sussing it out at all, like you might do in a startup world, it just goes to die, you know. And when you're having a lot of your ideas like just die, and without anybody like kind of kicking the tires on them at all, it's just very frustrating, I think.
I'm going to thank Paul and Martha for asking like my next 6 questions. No, it's fine. But it's amazing because you guys touched on so many important things. So this concept of novelty is really, really important for the ADHD brain. It shouldn't be attention deficit. It should be interest deficit, because boredom is the end of the earth for us. Absolutely, the end of the earth. So we're going to skip the novelty question because y'all covered that really, really well. Good job. But Paul brought up a really interesting point in hyperfocus. So we have this incredible ability to find a subject that we find fascinating, medieval literature, as it may be, that may not be particularly useful, but we'll lose hours, days of our lives to that. But it also is really helpful in the startup sphere. So how are you guys using hyperfocus, both to your benefit and your detriment? And when you combine that with distractibility, how do you manage those two things?
So my startup, if you will, is now my full focus is my art gallery and being an artist. So I've gone into that world, and I will hyper-focus, like I'll get a subject matter that I want to like focus on and do a series. And it drives my artist husband completely crazy because I will have 5 paintings going at once. And whenever I have an idea on like one, or I don't have the ability to wait for the paint to dry. So it's like, I'm just gonna start on the next one now. So, I mean, I use that to my benefit for sure. But sometimes I get caught up in, I realize that it needs to be publicized. What we're doing needs to be publicized. It needs to be on social media. We need to get it out there. We need to make these connections with potential buyers, et cetera. And sometimes I will spend entirely too much time making reels and going to things. And I'm just like, wow, I just made 10 different reels, but I haven't painted today yet. and I need to finish all of these things because, whatever. So pros and cons, right?
Pros and cons.
Thank you. So I'm particularly blessed in that the field that I have found myself in, which is architecture and design, I have no 2 days that are the same. And that is largely by design. I have contemporaries who are very successful doing the same damn thing every day. You go drive through prominent neighborhoods in St. Louis and you will see the same house over and over again. Not necessarily the same house exactly, but you can start to see a personality, and that personality is the same. I can't do that. If I were to try to do the same thing over and over, I would be so bored with my job, and it would be a job, it wouldn't be a passion. And that's really what it takes to key into that hyper focus, is to make sure that you have a passion for whatever you're doing. If I were to try to go into the tech field, if I were to try to go into banking, my brother-in-law is an unbelievably successful finance guy. He spends all day, every day in a spreadsheet, and I go cross-eyed when I open Excel. So, I mean, it's everyone's brain is different. Now, what's great about what I do is that one day I'm designing a mausoleum, the next day I'm designing a home. Some days I'm just going into my software and I'm developing models that we can use in other projects, like windows that can be parametrically altered, or door systems, or whatever. Or I'm looking up the coloration and patination of metals. I mean, I can literally bill my clients for following whatever rabbit down whatever hole I want, and it's fantastic because I like what I do. To an extent. I mean, if I'm sitting there playing World of Warcraft, it's probably not going to be billable, which is another issue. I can't play video games. We'll talk. So I one time had a friendly debate with my wife about my hobbies, because while I love my work, I also am ADHD, and I like to look at other things. I like to look around. I like to see what's fun to do. I've learned banjo. I spent 3 years learning card tricks. I learned guitar. I've taught myself piano. I've learned 7 languages just out of boredom. I've done all these things, but the problem is, once I have quote unquote figured them out, once I've learned what is the basis of every card trick, once I've learned the grammar of a language, then I lose interest because I don't have that passion for it. I just had a curiosity. But when you have a passion for something, that's when you can start to delve into the artistry of the thing. And that's the difference. You can learn something. You can go out there and pursue something, and you can figure it out, and you can learn everything you need to know. But until you're a black belt, you actually don't start studying martial arts. Once you have your black belt, that's when you have all the tools that you need to pursue the art form. And that's what I'm doing every day with my work, is that I'm pursuing the art. I'm trying to take it to that next level. All my hobbies, I take to the point where I have figured them out. But they all have their intrinsic art. I'm just not following them because that's not where my hyper-focus lies.
Yeah, and there's a process, and you may have heard this before, but when you learn to ride a bike or play golf or anything, initially you're consciously incompetent, right? And then as you start to gain some skill, you become consciously competent. You don't ever want to, if you want to be better at anything, you don't ever want to be unconsciously competent. Unfortunately, there are a whole lot of people in the world who are unconsciously incompetent. And that's an incurable disease. So, and if you have ADHD, a lot of people with ADHD are unconsciously incompetent, right? And they need to come to grips with the fact that, wait a minute, I need to find something, as you said, the passion, that's what triggered me on it. I need to find something I can focus on and that will benefit me, and it can't be driven by outside, because you'll be doing things that you think you should be doing and it will kill you. Slowly and very guaranteed you will be dead in no time, because it's just debilitating. But if you find something you're passionate about, then really be conscious about it and never get to that unconscious competent. And that's where your ADHD can, it's that lack of patience, right? That constant curiosity, that never happy with anything. I like to tell people publishing is like the Rose Parade. People that design the floats don't watch the Rose Parade, right? No, they're done at midnight, and they start at 1 a.m. designing the next year's float, right? And I thought, well, that's perfect for us with ADHD, right? Like you said, it's not the getting something done, it's doing another thing and doing it differently.
I think one of the markers of ADHD in terms of our interests is we're on the extremes of interest. So what doesn't interest us really doesn't interest us, and we can't develop a mild interest in it. And what interests us, we go full force into. And I think that's what's really important about entrepreneurship is when we find something we're deeply passionate about. I'm just like you. I can't remember a time when I didn't pick up leadership books. I don't know why. I wanted to know what made people follow other people and what designed that kind of mindset. I mean, back to my youth, I can remember reading these books and what made people tough and resilient, and those were the things I thought about even then. So, and I'm still interested in it. And I think we have to find that thing that we're really, really passionate about. You've heard everybody up here talk about something creative. My undergraduate was in theater and vocal music. All of us are in creative roles, and we don't know each other. So I think there's something to be said about that. The way that our brains work lend very well to creative process and not to a lot of boundaries or trying to do things in a mainstream way, but really looking at the creative process and how our interests can make something. So the never good enough. Do you ever feel like you do stuff just for the sake of doing it, but you want it to be productive? Like you want it, I don't know, there's for me at least, there's this obsession with like, I'll color, but what am I going to do with it? Like I could spend 3 days coloring. Don't give me markers because you won't see me for 3 days. I'll hyperfocus. But if I don't know what I'm going to do with it, like maybe I'll turn this into wrapping paper. I'm not kidding. Like this is, that's where I can't do it just for the sake of doing it. It has to have a purpose.
So there's a couple of things here. They're absolutely right about the hyperfocus and being done with it when you're done with it. My own personal anecdote is I used to run a historic house museum, and I had to do a Halloween event, and I had to learn about Victorian mourning rituals. And it turns out that if enough people die in a house, even the chickens that come through the front door have to wear a black ribbon around their neck. I have no reason to know this fact, but I have a taxidermied rooster in my office that I inherited from my uncle, and it has a black ribbon around its neck because I had to learn this one stupid thing for this one silly job. So we do hyperfocus, we do learn ridiculous things, and then we do let them go. The things we hold on to are important, and the creativity is another thing. I also went to college on a vocal scholarship. I have met 3 of the people today beforehand. I had no idea that all of us were involved in art. So it's wonderful. It's a huge thing that we all do. But then we have to live, and I can help you find that passion. That's like my whole job, by the way. So if anybody needs help, I'm here. We also have to live our day-to-day lives. Everybody here has talked about taking out the trash or doing the dishes, or I can't follow a to-do list. How do you?
No. I can follow it.
Yeah, I need a list.
It's freestyling.
The list is helpful.
The list is helpful. Okay, so
I make the list, but they're electronic, and then they're gone.
right, exactly. So
Look at the list.
Need a paper list with a checkbox.
yes, and no more than 3 things on it at a time.
They have not made eye contact once.
Yeah. So that's a lot of what I talk about is this to-do list and how, like, are you using your to-do list for work? Are you using your to-do list for home? How do you manage those day-to-day things?
We have a Kanban board at my house.
Sweet.
I kid you not, for all of the household tasks that need to happen. A
Yeah.
Kanban board is used, this is what I got from IT. In Agile development, you have like the backlog of what needs to be done, what you're working on right now, and the backlog should be organized in order of importance. What you're working on right now, and then what is done. That's a basic Kanban board. And every task is on its own sticky note, and I try to color code them, but I kind of threw that away because I'm like, let's just make it be on the board. And so we have a Kanban board. It's how we remodeled our house. It's how we get through daily life. Whenever my husband's like, why didn't you do this? I'm like, was it on the Kanban board? Because if it's not there, it doesn't exist. even if it's obviously right here in the middle of the living room. So that is how we get by, because I am what my report card said every year: inconsistent performance. I just need the Kanban board, and we can have happy people.
I'm a big fan of the Kanban board.
Yeah, so there's also software. The one I'm using currently now with 3 different teams is called Trello, Trello. And it's awesome because you can do all kinds of things besides Kanban. But if you're doing anything that involves a team and there's multiple responsibilities and there's gating factors and dates and times, those are all things that are death to us with ADHD. But the beauty of the Kanban board that most people don't really even understand is it's proven through psychological science, and I know this because of my medical publishing background, that you remember things, and if you don't complete that task, it takes up memory that you never release until you consider it done. So there's a mental exercise you can do and close those doors, right? But a Kanban board, in the real world, we did it in one development team on the offices had glass sides, and we just had 3 stripes of tape, and we moved the sticky notes literally from one area to the other. We also had to find that the backlog had to have a parking lot, because there were some things we knew, okay, we may never get to that. Put it off to the parking lot because it's confusing our priorities, right? But find something that works for you, right? So Trello is a great tool in that respect. And I'm probably the crappiest person on the team, even though I trained them all how to use it. Because I start watching a video on the Mandelbrot set, and I now know more about Mandelbrot set than probably most mathematicians. Right? It's just part of our disease.
I think there's somebody in here who can speak fairly well to my inability to use Trello.
So professionally, I have the benefit of having a wonderful second in command who every so often will say, Tom, we need to talk about our projects. Tom, we need to sit down and see where everything's going. Tom, have you done this? Tom, we need to do that. So he's on my ass, which is helpful. At home, there is, of course, the issue of you don't have a second in command, you have a partner. And we are all, if we are trying, well, that's your issue to deal with. If we're all doing what we're supposed to be doing, we are in a partnership in the home. Now, when you are ADHD and your partner is not, it can be tumultuous because there is a division of understanding. There is a separation between how we perceive versus how they perceive, how we accomplish versus how they accomplish. We know that if we have an itemized list of what we need to accomplish throughout the day, we can get it done. Maybe not in order, maybe not completing one thing at a time, but by gum, we will have that done by the end of the day. But why is it their job to write this list? I personally, and this might be ADHD, this might be just being male, the debate is constant in my house, but I walk into a house and unless I'm thinking about looking for messes, I don't see messes.
No, that's not male, that's ADHD.
Sweet. Can I quote you on that?
I get yelled at for this all the time. Not yelled at, talked to.
I mean, I get accused of having blinders on and walking through and not seeing the mess, not seeing the towel on the floor, not seeing this, that, or the other. So I find myself having to think about, is this house messy? Which shouldn't be. But, I mean, it's a small price to pay for what I consider to be a blessing in a creative field. Mm-hmm. I mean, the fact remains, when I come up with a house design and when I present that to a client, I have exhausted every possibility for how that house is going to be laid out. And I love it because when they come back and say, well, Tom, what if we did this here? And I say, no, I tried that. And it doesn't work because of X, Y, Z. Nope, we can't do that. And this is why, nope, this is going to save you money doing it my way. I'm able to defend my decisions because I have literally chased every rabbit through every hole and found the way to do it the best way. So home, work. At work, we've got people to help us. At home, we need to figure out how to help ourselves.
We are going to offer couples with one ADHD partner and one non-neurodivergent partner. Groups starting soon, so just FYI. Julie, you're
I'm just laughing over here because I do not notice my own mess at all, but boy, do I notice his.
I've had that problem too.
I can't explain that other than apparently I want to see his. I don't know. Marriage. Just marriage.
so your job is literally to help people be good at administrative things. How do you manage that?
With a good person, good second in command. Lists, a lot of lists. And I'm not kidding when I say I just forget to log on. It's like, what do I have to do today? Nothing, because the list isn't pulled up. So I have to print it out or I have to pull it up. Lists are my ride or die. I have to work with lists, or because to your point, it doesn't exist if it's not on the list. So I have to put it there. And I do have a good team that works with me who we have a good relationship where they can say, you're not listening, you're not paying attention to this, how about we talk about this? Are you gonna get this done ever, Julie? So they know they can do that with me, and it's actually very helpful. And I will usually drop things and move them around to get what I need to done. I'm highly productive, so that's usually not an issue, but it is tough to teach others how to manage in the administrative realm or in the project management realm when I fight with it internally so much. I think the blessing of it is my brain works very creatively. So I can look at a situation in a company and say, well, this is missing, or what if you tried this? And it's something they just have never thought of because it wasn't by the book. The book exists, they read it, they're trying to do it this way. And I'm telling you, leadership is human behavior. There is no guidebook on human behavior. They've written 20,000 of them, and they all touch on parts of it, but none of them are perfect because we're all different. So what works is independent.
When I have clients call, they all ask me what the process is for ADHD coaching, and I cannot give them an answer for that exact reason because everyone's ADHD is different. So if you ever call for a consult, know that that's going to be the answer. So I want to bring up, I don't know how many of you have noticed that I'm playing with these little hourglasses because time is another thing that is imaginary for us. So number one, can somebody tell me what time it is? 12:39. 12:39, excellent. So in the next 10 minutes.
To 3 hours.
To 3 hours, exactly. We've got people who are going to kick us out of this room, which is helpful. And I think there are people who have questions. So in the next 5 turns of this, how do you guys deal with time and the fact that it doesn't exist?
Not well. I was interviewed on a podcast, this was a few years ago, and the guy said, so what's the secret to your success? I said, number 1, I work harder than other people. Number 2, I do more research. And number 3, I sleep less. And he said, how little do you sleep? I said, 3 to 5 hours a night. He goes, that's impossible. You can't do that.
No, it's not.
You can't survive that way. It's like, excuse me? Talk to the ladies who worked with me for 25 years who saw emails at 2 a.m. and I beat them to the office at 6 a.m., right? Or they saw an email at 4 a.m. and I beat them to the office at 6 a.m. But the side effect of that, and I want to encourage people because I used to go into meetings way more prepared than anybody else. Most people, they hardly thought there was a meeting until they walked in. And many meetings where I came very prepared, and usually it was talking about something that was going to be a decision to be made, and I would state a case, and then people would try to shoot it full of holes, like you said, and I would have an answer, and they would come up with some other idea out of their head at that moment because they hadn't thought about it before walking through the door, and then I would shoot that idea down.
Oh, but doesn't it just break your heart when they find something you didn't think of?
No, they hadn't.
Never? Not
Never.
once?
Not once.
Oh,
Not my
bullshit.
entire corporate career. I'm honest with you. And the problem is, then this statement came, why are you always so arrogant? And it's like, wait a minute. I spent hours and hours researching and come with a very well-researched opinion, and you came with something off the top of your head without even thinking about it, and I'm the one who's arrogant? So the mechanism that has worked for me, ask questions, don't make statements, right? So if you know what you're talking about, anybody can ask you any question. And there's a scientific principle, psychological principle actually, and it's called, I know I was going to forget it, but anyway, I'll think of it at some point. But, oh, I know, it's chauffeur knowledge, okay? So this famous astrophysicist was asked to give all these lectures after he won the Nobel Prize. And so he had a chauffeur that would drive him to these lectures and sit in the lectures. And so after about 30 of these, the chauffeur said, how does this not drive you crazy saying the same thing over and over again? The guy goes, oh, it certainly does. And the chauffeur said, look, let me take your lecture and let me do one. And you sit in the front row and wear my chauffeur's hat. And he said, okay. So in this meeting, he gives this long talk and is able to answer about half the questions. But all of a sudden, people with real knowledge started asking questions. And he said, that's such a simple question. I think even my chauffeur can answer it. But you don't want to have chauffeur knowledge, right? You, as a person with ADHD, you want to understand the why and how it all relates, how it categorizes. So there's this knowledge path that goes from data. Data's just data points. You move that into information by somewhat organizing those data points. You then start to make sense of it. That's called knowledge, right? But you can't use knowledge until you have wisdom. Wisdom is how to rightly apply that knowledge. And you only get all of that by, number one, working through that process, but number two, applying that knowledge, right? And that's where we with ADHD, we will run every rabbit hole and try everything, right? People say, well, how do you know about simulation? I've been doing it in my head my entire life. How do you know about neural net modeling? I've been doing it in my head my entire life. And I had to come to understand that, right? So think about how you can present your ideas in a way that doesn't come off as arrogant, but comes off helping people understand what they don't know. Right?
So the way I deal with time is with difficulty, like everybody else up here, I'm sure. There is the ability for me when I am deep in the weeds on something and really having fun. And I mean, let's face it, when we're doing what we love, we're doing it because we're having fun and we're stuck in it. And man, it's better than a drug. I at least could sit in front of my computer when I call it riding the wave, because you really are. I mean, you've caught a wave, and in my specific profession, and this may not relate to any of you, but you can probably take the metaphor and use it as your own in some way. But when I am designing a home and I have all of a sudden discovered the underlying philosophy for what is going to drive that home's design, when I have just discovered what it is that is going to push this, give it meaning, make it more than just four walls and a roof. When I have found that and it starts to tell me what this house is going to look like, I essentially just become a tool of execution. And at that point, that's when I can, Stephen King, when he talks about writing, he said, finding the hole in the page. It's exactly the same idea. You are diving deep into your own specific field of expertise. And that's a dangerous place to be for two reasons. First off, if somebody interrupts you, you're terrified it's just gonna be gone. Mm-hmm. And depending on the level of that interruption, it will. The second thing is if you are in a quiet room, locked away up above your garage or something doing this, and you find yourself in that hole, I mean, you'll look up and realize it's 3 a.m, 5 a.m the next day. I mean, you've just been at it. So time management is difficult. There is a new product out there that I'm absolutely enraptured with. I at least very curious about ADHD. And it's this new watch that was developed in Scandinavia. It has no hands, so you don't know the specific time, but it gives a gentle vibration every 5 minutes. And so you recognize the passage of time without acknowledging the actual time. I am curious as hell as how that would work with me. Like, I mean, would I be able to sit there and be like, okay, that's been like 50 buzzes, I need to go take a break or something? Or would it just be like I eventually take the watch off because it keeps reminding me that something's happening? I don't know. But in the meantime, time is a difficult thing, I think, for all of us. But once you find that hole, you don't want to back out of it.
Oh, I can go quickly. Yeah, I don't have as much of, I don't have time blindness necessarily in the traditional sense of, being late or not knowing what time it is, or mine is more, I think, what you hit on, which is not being able to estimate how much time something's going to take. So that's really where my problem is. So I'll think that, oh, that'll take me an hour, 3 hours later, I'm still sitting there. Or the opposite, oh, that looks so hard, that's gonna take me 5 hours. And an hour in, and I'm like, wow, I'm done. And so the only way I manage it is tracking my time. And, okay, that task takes this long, so the next time it comes up, I can make a more realistic guess instead of just freaking out because it's gonna take me 5 hours when really I need 50 minutes, so, yeah.
So, I've learned things along the way in my IT career. So I was doing user experience, and then you do a lot of facilitation and other things. And when you're doing this, much like you are right now, when you're managing other people, you start to really become aware of time because there's time blocks. And so I began to learn a lot more about this, and just whenever I was facilitating things, and just there's some great like time timer clocks and things like that you can visually see how much time you have left or that the time is running out. You can also just you can do like a low fidelity version of this and just take a cheap clock and just use a dry erase marker on it to give yourself like, hey, at this time, this color, you need to be doing this thing, or this color, you need to be doing that other thing. So I've used that kind of stuff at home. Again, I just bring all this stuff home. and then when I'm needing to work, I do usually 20-minute bursts. So I'll do the Pomodoro method, another thing that I learned just kind of tangentially through my IT work, through my UX work. And that's been really helpful. What I can't do is tell you when I did something in the past. It might have been yesterday, it might have been 2 weeks ago, could have been last year. I have no idea. That's when I did it. It's done. It no longer interests me. I have no idea. So that's fun.
That was the other day.
Yeah, the other
exactly.
day.
I don't know, before COVID, post-COVID, that's how we measure time now.
Yeah.
So I have like 14 more topics that I want to cover, but we are really at a point where we need to do Q&A. So you all tell me if you have questions. Okay.
Borrow one of the mics.
Sure.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Sharice. I have a question, and if it's too personal, I understand, but I'm just curious. I'm a mental health therapist, and I was wondering if anyone has chosen to take medication, and if you found it helpful for you, or if there are other non-medication tools or techniques that you would like to share. I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, I was diagnosed at 26 when my daughter was diagnosed. She was 6 years old in school. So I didn't know. I thought I was stupid, actually, my entire grade school and high school life. I just thought I was stupid. Everybody else was smart. I hung out with the smart kids to hopefully engender the teachers to like me more. Yeah. So, but I always knew that if I wrote stuff down, I had better luck. And so that was already like a tool in my toolbox, right, to write things down. And I tried a lot of medications in my late 20s, and a lot of them were horrible for me because the different medications have different effects, and you have to like try them each. And most of them have a possible side effect of suicide, which is joyful. So, I had one where like I couldn't stay awake. After taking 2 pills, I couldn't stay awake for like almost 2 weeks. And I was just like, this is just not worth it. I've got 2 kids. I need to be able to do these things. But I did finally land on Concerta, which I love because it's like slow in, slow out. But I will tell you this, Ritalin, all of these drugs are Ritalin, or almost all of them are, will increase your heart rate. And over time, it loses efficacy. And so it's damaging your heart. I was in high stress startup situations. My heart rate was getting out of control. And it's part of the reason why I jumped to art full time. And I actually went off my meds for a while and everything. Now I'm back on a lower dose, and we'll see what happens. But yeah, it's a struggle.
So I went all the way through grade school, high school, undergrad without a diagnosis. There was one point in undergrad that I got some Ritalin from a friend of mine when I was planning on studying for a test.
We don't recommend that.
She's not going to like a lot of what I have to say after this. But I borrowed what she said. Anyway, so I took that, and I remember thinking to myself, well, I'm just going to clean my room until this stuff kicks in. 3 hours later, I was using a piece of tape to get the lint out of my carpet. Hyper-focused. So Ritalin was not for me, I discovered. Well, I mean, in that situation. But then when I was in my late 20s, early 30s, back in graduate school, is when I finally got a diagnosis. Because I was battling. You know, I was struggling to make everything work. And bounced around on different things and finally landed on extended release Adderall, which is what I take and am currently on right now. Now, it does have its downsides. For example, I am not as creative, I find, when I am on Adderall. I mean, it is the paradox that creative people have suffered with through generations. I mean, you think about, you know, some of the best musicians, some of the best artists dealing with depression, dealing with their own things. The second they get on medications, they hate it because they are no longer that creative. I found that same thing with Adderall. So, I'm going to close your ears. I have found that Adderall and marijuana combined together make a really good creative slushie. Yeah, it's
legal.
maybe not recommended though.
legal
I mean, yeah.
To be clear, I am pro medication.
How about self-medication?
I'm not pro borrowing a Ritalin from your friend.
Right. So, but there's also the downside of Adderall, Adderall, Ritalin, all of these things, and that they are, as you said, speed. I mean, they are methamphetamine. It says so right on the bottle. So I come home at the end of the day at work. If I want to go to sleep that night, I have to have a drink. Like, I need to have a glass of bourbon just to take the edge off, which is just not conducive to being a good husband and father. So it's this double-edged sword. If I want to be productive, if I want to stay on task, and the way that I can describe it best, what it does for me is that instead of being distracted for 3 hours by something, I'm only distracted for 10 minutes. So I'm able to pull myself back. That is what the drug does for me.
Yeah, for me, medication wasn't an option in my mind. I grew up, my high school was on the cover of Time magazine as the campus in the United States with the highest availability of drugs. And the college was right across the street, and they would come across to get drugs at my high school. So I have a lot of friends that died of overdose or died in prison because they were caught dealing. So that was never an option for me. I have friends and family members who have self-medicated, which is also not a good idea. I've found that the best thing that's worked for me is I moved to intermittent fasting.
Like
So-
with your diet, food?
Yes, food. And that causes the ability to have mindfulness, right? Because after a while, you don't even realize the mechanism, but the hunger triggers your thinking about what you're doing. And it triggers your thinking about your thinking, right? It's back to the consciously competent, and you don't want to be unconsciously incompetent. And with ADHD, you become unconsciously incompetent a lot, right?
a whole other thing we could talk about.
Yeah, so
We could do a whole session on food.
the intermittent fasting, though, has regulated I believe, my serotonin levels, and there's some studies that support that. There are a lot of people in Big Pharma that don't like that. And I know some of them personally because I used to be the publisher at Drug Facts and Comparisons. And I know why they don't like it, because it's one of their highest grossing, that whole category of drugs, right? Convenience drugs, I call them. But there are ways to manage it without drugs, through mindfulness, and in my case, the intermittent fasting helps me to have the mindfulness. But we're also talking about tools. The Apple Watch, I have it set so that I have a stand alert, and it says, you should be standing. Now, I don't always stand because I don't obey real well because I have ADHD, but it is that ticker, right? And it's cheap because it came with the watch.
So to answer really quickly, a lot of women are, especially if we don't run really hyperactive, which I don't, are not diagnosed properly. So I have been diagnosed with anxiety and depression, I mean, as long as I can remember, like teenage years. I was 47 before somebody went, maybe it's ADHD. So I'm still taking the antidepressant, but it works for me, so I haven't switched. And we've had the conversation, and I'm kind of waiting to see. I'm in a really critical point at work that I know what that interruption might do, so I'm like, yeah, let me wait. So I don't know where I'm going to end up on it, or if I'm going to think a different medication is good. I'm managing fine, so I may not need it. But just letting people know that, if you have antidepressants, make sure that the diagnosis isn't incorrect. And they can co-occur, so that's obviously happening too. So.
I could spend the entirety of the afternoon discussing women and ADHD and the misdiagnosis.
Actually, this is important, I think, to double click on, is I had a doctor that I said, I am ADHD, I need Concerta, I don't have a doctor right now, and I just need a prescription from you, my general practitioner. And my general practitioner said, I don't think you're ADHD, here, take this lithium. And I was like, no, I'm not taking it. I'm not taking it. So, I mean, it's crazy. And I don't know why GPs, I guess, yeah, it's methamphetamines. Okay, fine. I'm not trying to say it's just whatever. But when you have been through all the things to figure out what it is that you need, please just look at my chart, So, yeah.
For me to get a diagnosis, I had to take my elementary school report cards to my psychiatrist that I had been seeing 7 years, and he went, oh, fill this thing out. And then when I called to check on the actual diagnosis, his office manager said, do you want some drugs? You probably know more about it than he does anyway. So I won't be recommending my psychiatrist to anyone. But unmedicated, short answer to your question.
It's bananas out there, though. It's really hard. And it's hard when you lose your psychiatrist to find another psychiatrist and get medication again. And it's depressing. Sorry.
Okay. I'd also just like to echo the same sentiments. I went to my doctor and said, I think I have this. My doctor's like, why don't we try this? I decided not to take the anxiety medication because I was like, I'm telling you what I think. He's like, well, let's try this first. And then, but anywho, questions. I feel like I've not been diagnosed with ADHD, but I do feel like I have it, but I'm fairly productive and I can force myself into doing things when I know I really have to by creating lists and deadlines and things like that and reminders. It really helps me. But I'm entering this new stage of entrepreneurship, and so I'm going to do some consulting and then working on my business. So I'm trying to create routines that are helpful and also finding peak times that really work for me. I know I work really well. When we talk about late night hours, I can get lost in the late night hours, but that's not always great for partnership. So I'm newly married, and me staying up till 5, 6 in the morning every single day when he has a traditional job and going to work, I'm going to still get woken up. It's going to disrupt my sleep. It's going to disrupt his sleep. So trying to figure out new routines, kind of what is your experience or advice, or are you guys all working around the clock nonstop?
Yeah, I just sleep 4 hours a night.
I mean, I sleep 4 hours. 4 hours is good, but do your partners never see? How does it work? Do you have kids? How do you balance?
So he can sleep.
Someone recommended a sound machine to me today. They were like, a sound machine would help him, because I started trying to do 4 in the morning because I was like, am I really a night owl? But if I'm saying I really work best between the hours of midnight and 5 a.m., I'm really a morning person, probably, because it's really quiet. I don't know. So I tried 4 a.m. to get a bunch of stuff done, and I found it was really helpful because I could really focus, and before everybody's at work, I've scheduled 20 emails. And then I can go do the things I want to and slowly ease into my morning. I don't know, who knows if that'll work long term, but still trying to figure out how to create routines as someone who has ADHD.
I think you might be ADHD. I think you might be ADHD.
Yeah, just maybe.
I also talk really quickly, so that's another.
I get up at 4 a.m., sometimes 3. I go to the office by 5. I love it. The phone doesn't ring. There's no distractions. It's perfect. So what I do, we each have an Echo Dot, the Amazon device. our little bugs that we all live with these days. And I have mine set to the lowest volume, and it wakes me up every morning to ocean sounds. So it's very soothing, it's not jarring, and I'm speedy enough that it just wakes me right up. So.
One more quick answer to that question. Yep.
Totally, I'm totally serious. We don't sleep together. We sleep in different rooms. Yes, for this reason.
Okay.
Yes.
I maybe eventually. I'm like, we just got married, so I'm like, I'm hoping.
We're about to hit 20 years. Ask me after about 10. He's gonna be like, I'm gonna kick her out if she doesn't sleep in a different room.
Just real quick, architecturally speaking, I design houses specifically for this because nobody wakes up at the same time. So I design the bedroom, the bathroom, and the closet in a linear fashion so that you can get through them and out without going back into the bedroom.
All the 50s sitcoms, the 50s and 60s sitcoms, they were right. Separate beds.
No toilets.
Alrighty, before we wrap up, any last thoughts from our moderator?
Oh my goodness, there's so many things that we didn't talk about. We didn't talk about perfectionism. We didn't talk about procrastination. We didn't talk about 1,000 different ADHD traits. This could have been a whole day conversation.
Everyone to the pub.
I have clients this afternoon, but yeah, sure, go for it. Thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it. If you want to know more about what I do, I'm going to be here for probably another half an hour. If you don't have time to talk, but you want to know more about the practice, there are sign-up sheets up here, and I will contact you. Really, thank you all for coming. I appreciate it.
Let's give a round of applause for our amazing panelists and our moderator. Thank you all for being here.